Hello, everyone, and welcome. For those who don't know me, my name is Gwendolyn Reese, and this is the fourth module of Theophania's Foundations of the Craft class, the theory section. So for those of you who have been following along in this series, welcome back, and let's go ahead and get started. So in this module, we are going to be covering the Theoi and the spirits. Theoi is the Greek word that usually gets translated as gods. So that's largely what we're talking about today. And for those who need a quick refresher or reminder, part of the purpose of taking this course is that anyone, even if they're just starting out, by the end of this course should have enough information that they will feel confident in having a firm foundation for their personal practice. So today we're going to first start off talking about reciprocity. We're going to talk about the Theoi, and we're also going to talk about some of the other types of spirits, such as the ancestors, the Fae, and nature spirits that you may either find yourself in relationship with or specifically work to build a relationship with as part of your practice. So for those who don't know me well, the divine being with whom I am in the closest relationship is the god Apollon, Apollo. And as I was discussing what needed to go in this particular module, he was very insistent that we needed to start with reciprocity because healthy relationships with the gods are reciprocal. They are based and rooted in reciprocity. And in the very first module, I talked about the importance of the craft as creating alternative culture. And this is one of those areas that is critically important because the main models of relationships that we often have are transactional. And in fact, when you have people reading backwards into ancient Greek religion, they often have a transactional mindset when they are looking at things like offerings and sacrifices. And this is absolutely incorrect. It is absolutely incorrect. Those people who were in ancient Greece, they did not understand them this way. They understood it as gift culture. And so they understood what was happening in offerings and sacrifices as part of gift culture. It is rooted in reciprocity. And I'm just going to quickly mention here that part of the reason that we have that understanding is because it was deliberately misrepresented by early Christian apologists attempting to undermine their competition in the ancient Greek and ancient Roman religions. So, what is reciprocity? Reciprocity is about mutuality. It is absolutely not market exchange, because market exchange, where you say, here is this thing and it is worth exactly the same as what I'm trying to get from you, and so we're going to exchange. It is not how you approach your relationship with the gods. You are not trying to bribe the gods. You are not trying to buy from the gods. That is absurd, first of all. I mean, what am I, as a little mortal down here, in many ways going to do that is going to like bribe the gods? But it's anathema. And it's really about relationship building. And if you're looking at things through this kind of like tit for tat kind of exchange, you're not going to build any kind of deep, meaningful relationship any more than you would with a human. Okay, so in reciprocity, the primary value is always on the health of the relationship itself. And that when we are dealing with the gods, therefore, or any spirits, that's what we need to be looking at. And in fact, this is how we ought to be approaching our relationships with nature. We are in a reciprocal, mutual relationship with all of nature, and our primary emphasis should be on the health of the relationship. So again, this is a source of many historic and current misunderstandings about offerings. Offerings are gifts that you give that express intimacy. Their value is not about the exchange rate value. when my brother, who has few means, gives me a comic book that he knows I will love and that I have not yet discovered, that is a deeply meaningful and valuable gift, because it's about that relationship and that bond that we have over certain kinds of culture and cultural artifacts. So again, it's about like giving something to someone because you want to bring them joy, not because you're trying to do some sort of exact exchange about something. Now, it's very important to note, especially when we're dealing with spirits and with the gods, is that there is not a requirement to be in relationship. If there is a requirement to be in relationship, it is not a mutual relationship. So it must be freely chosen on all sides. You don't get to demand that one of the gods should be in relationship with you. And if they come forward and are being demanding, if any spirit is, then that's a warning sign. You don't need to be in a relationship with any of them. And just like with human relationships, there are different levels of intimacy that you may have with particular spirits. So this is coming from my understanding and my dealing with the various theoi, is that the ones that I respect, the gods that I respect, what they really want for us to do is to kind of grow up, in other words, evolve and be conscious co-creators with them. The ones that I respect absolutely do not infantilize us, nor do they try to make us dependent upon them. They try to empower us and work with us and are trying to help us get to the point where we are in partnerships with them. And that is one of the things that I'm really going to encourage you to deeply consider about what does a healthy relationship with a spirit look like? And if it is ever anything that you would look at in a human relationship and be like, that is not healthy, it is not healthy with any of the spirits either. So I really want to call attention to that, because part of the other thing is that it is my belief. And so therefore, you can bracket this as this is my belief. So I am sharing my perspective here. But it is my belief that human beings at this point, approaching the gods as parental figures, I think is not in alignment with our evolution anymore. It might have well been at some point, but I don't think that it is now. I think that that can be a very challenging place in terms of inhibiting your evolution. So that doesn't mean that you can't go to them as looking for some comfort. I mean, certainly there are many different relationships that you can look at for some comfort. But if you are always going to the gods to basically have mommy or daddy clean up after you, then that's kind of a problem. And the reason I'm bringing that up, I doubt very seriously, honestly, that anyone watching this video has that approach, but that is a lot of ways of how, at least in some of the versions of monotheistic religions, not all, but some, that there tends to be kind of a mommy daddy, well, never mommy, actually just daddy kind of approach there, but like this kind of parental over figure, be it someone who is either kind of enabling or someone who is like the very strict father figure. I don't know that that's really healthy. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the Theoi. So the Theoi, sometimes we call them the great ones, is basically the gods. Now, the boundaries of what is in this category are really not precise. And my rootedness is in Hellenic culture. They were not precise in Hellenic culture either, in Greek culture either, ancient Greek culture. So there's some permeability on those boundaries, and there are a number of theological notions about what they are. But from the Hellenic or Hellenistic perspective, this is polytheism. So they are individuated beings. They are real. we would say that they are real. They are not, archetypes in the term of kind of like, oh, they're just parts of your collective unconscious. They are considered real beings that it would exist whether or not there are any humans around to be in relationship with them. One of the critical things here is that they are immortal, they are deathless. And part of this is because they do not primarily exist in the physical plane. And so, therefore, they are not subject to the types of limitations that come from physicality. At the same time, though, in this perspective, they are in the cosmos. So they are affected by, like, Muira, by the ideas of the overall structure and movement of the cosmos. So a lot of times you'll see that you'll have these combination, as we had gone through in a previous video about various theological stances, where you can be a polytheist, and I am a hard polytheist. I believe Apollon is real. I believe Apollon would be real whether or not there were any humans around. He might not have the name Apollon, because I doubt very seriously that is his name for himself. I think that is a use name that we have for him. But I believe that he exists independently of us. The great ones also, they tend to have kind of their domains or spheres of influence. So for example, Poseidonos, he is the god of the sea. And he has some interest in all water. And one of the things to know about water is that water is the blood of the planet. It's the blood of the planet. It's what circulates the entire water cycle. There is something very sacred there. So that is kind of his domain. And coming from that, he has various agendas. And I always say all beings have agendas. This is not a bad thing. It's called a focus. It's what they want. And I'm bringing up Poseidon for a very good reason. And that is, in my experience with him, he is one of the major deities from the Greek pantheon that you can go to and get help on anything dealing with the environmental crisis. He has a very powerful agenda around trying to address the climate crisis and any number of other types of environmental degradation. And why? Well, he's the god of the sea. He's the god of the oceans. And he cares, that's in his domain. This has a dramatic effect on the oceans. So, the other thing about the Theoi is that we are in relationship with them. We're in relationship with them whether we intend to be or not in this way. So I said earlier that, you don't need to be in an intimate relationship with any one of the gods, but as a collective, we are in relationship with them because we are sharing the cosmos with them. And whether or not our relationship with any of the great ones is good or bad has an awful lot to do with our actions in the world and how what we are doing affects the things that they care about. So, in that greater way, we are in relationship with them. So, again, their agendas. I think this is incredibly important to understand, because much like if you were going to be building a relationship with any human, you want to understand what the areas of concern are. And, we go to different humans for different kinds of things. There are people that we may not have a deep, close friendship with, but that we may go to for a particular type of expertise or something along those lines. So all of them have these different areas of concern, different areas of focus, and there are things that they want to see accomplished. So if you are working on building a relationship with one of the great ones, or more than one of the great ones, these are some of the things that you want to understand, especially if it's going to be something where it is not necessarily a deep relationship, but you are wanting to call on them for something in particular. So, for example, one of the beings that you can always call on for anything that is health or healing related is the god Asclepios. You can also call on Apollon. Apollon's got kind of a broader portfolio, but Asclepios is the master physician. His work is to heal. And so, even if you are not a devotee of Asclepios, you can always call on him for healing. Now, you wouldn't call on him for help with your business unless you were in the business of being a healer. So, again, there's kind of calling on beings for various reasons. But they all have things that they want to see accomplished. And it's a good idea to try to get some understanding of what those are if you are going to work with them. So there's also, like I said, particular levels of intimacy. You can have individual intimacy with one of the great ones or more than one of the great ones. There's also sometimes intimacy that comes from a particular lineage that may not be individual. So it might not be like I have a very individual relationship with Apollon. But there's also a lineage-based thing in that all of Theophania is founded based on his and Athena's reaching out to us. So anyone who is associated with Theophania has some intimacy, some connection to those two in particular, because Theophania was founded based on their call. So often, if you are a part of either magical lines or sometimes historically, you might have ancestral lines that go back to relationships to a particular being. There's also often geographic connections. Now, here there may be, I'm in the United States, a lot of those specific relationships that would have been cultivated and maintained by various First Nations people are ruptured because of the horrific genocide that people like some of my ancestors helped visit upon them. So that is, a lot of those relationships are not necessarily immediately available to me. There are relationships that are there in Greece where they are associated in particular places. So there's also sometimes these geographic based. Now, that being said, when it comes to some of the other spirits, I am in clear relationship with some of the geographic spirits in my exact region. And we'll get a little bit into some of those nature-based spirits as well, because they are local. There's also often types of intimacy that are associated with their function. Again, like I said, you can have a close relationship. Anyone who is at all in the healing modalities can easily build a relationship with Asclepios, with Apollon. People who are in various forms of technology, you can easily build a relationship with Hephaestus, should you wish to do so. So again, there are various forms of alignment there. And then I also want to mention that, part of what we do when we're building relationships with some of these beings that are not human or not embodied is to try to figure out, what are they like? Agalma is the old Greek word there, and it means that which is pleasing. So what is it that they kind of prefer, much like we have preferences? So trying to pay attention to that, and you can give them some of the things that they like as presents. So when you are approaching learning about any of the specific Theoi, any of the gods, of course you want to learn the myths, but I'm going to give you some significant warnings here. Be very wary of working with the myth alone and taking that as a sole indicator. You will often get very incorrect understandings about the nature of the beings that you are approaching if you only pay attention to the myth. And there's various reasons for this. So first of all, specifically, very specifically for the Hellenic, for the Greek and the Roman, one of the things that we need to understand is how much of our knowledge of the myths comes through the filter of Ovid. And Ovid is a great writer. He was a wonderful Roman writer, and he wrote one of the first collections of the myths. The reason being that this was not a genre. So when you look at the ancient Hellenic sources, you don't have a genre of collection of myths. That's not how that works. They're all embedded. There's hymns, they're embedded in the epics, they're embedded in some of the tragedies. There's a bunch of different places where you can get a lot of information about the great ones, but they're not in collections of stories. So what Ovid was actually doing, though, Ovid was a Roman intellectual, and we would now call him a radical kind of reformer of the Roman elite, in that what he was doing was he was taking a very critical view of his own society and the elites in his society of which he was a part, and was criticizing them. And the way in which he did that was to use the tales of the gods, and he was really retelling them a lot of ways, kind of this gods behaving badly kind of spin on it, which the stories are there. I mean, he wasn't making the stories up, but the particular spin he kind of puts on it, what he's really doing is critiquing his own culture. So you'll get a really kind of particular slant with him that is not representative of what someone who is a believer would have thought. The other thing is that mythic language, the way in which myths work, they're multivalent, they work on many different levels of consciousness, and they're never meant to be understood literally. They're like revealing various things, and they're working in different ways. And if you start reading any myth literally, you're gonna miss a huge portion of what the myth is actually about. So one of the things to do is you take the myth, but you look at it from within the context of cultic information. How are they actually worshipped? So I'll give you one of my favorite examples of this. For anyone who doesn't know the story, there is a story in which the goddess Artemis, so Apollon's twin, she is the virgin huntress, and she's very much off in the woods with her band of other huntresses, and she lives Parthenos. Parthenos gets translated as virgin. What it actually means, what it really actually means, is any woman who holds her own sovereignty. She is not under the sovereignty of her father, and she is not under the sovereignty of a husband. So she is out there, she's living this very independent life. The big thing with Artemis is that is female independence on female terms. So she's out doing her thing. And one of her nymphs, one of her fellow huntresses, Callisto, becomes pregnant. And she is so enraged that she turns Callisto into a bear as punishment. Okay, so if you look at that, you're like, all right, so Artemis has this temper on her. If you just look at this myth, but the thing that you would be missing is that in the cultic, the worship of Artemis is the bear. Callisto is hers. That's one of her epithets. So an epithet is like these other names, these specific names. So Artemis Callisto, that is Artemis. So she didn't turn Callisto into a bear to punish her. That is her form as the bear mother. Artemis is bear mother. And of course, a bear mother is a very independent mother as well, very protective, very independent. So in the cult, you see that you have this cult name, and then you also have this tradition in which the young girls in Athens would be sent to the temple of Artemis at Brauron, at which point they would be raised for a portion of that in their transition in the temple, and they would be called little bears, and they would do the bear dance to Artemis. And so they're going through this like rite of passage, this female rite of passage under the guidance of Artemis in the form of bear mother. So you will get a completely skewed misunderstanding of that if you only looked at the myth and you didn't go to find out how were they actually worshipped. So look at the cultic information. And then that other part is look at the epithets, look at those names. They often will reveal so much about the being that you are trying to learn about and understand. And, you can do this, like if one of them comes to you, I strongly encourage that you learn as much about them as you can before you deepen that relationship. It will help you deepen that relationship. And if you are looking to approach one of the great ones to build a relationship, this is part of what you would do. Also, pay attention to the art, pay attention to how they are portrayed. Try to understand the concerns in back of what is presented. Again, this is trying to understand what is it that they really care about? What do they really care about that is behind whatever is being shown in the front, be it in the myth, the art, the cult? And pay attention to if they are breaking into the world through inspiration. So, if you begin seeing, I do an awful lot of looking around at various forms of pop culture, and at different times, I start seeing some of the great ones breaking into the world through inspiration, at which point you want to find out how and why. Apollon has been reaching out a lot. And most recently, you can see it most beautifully, I think, in the Rick Riordan books, the Trials of Apollo. And it's really powerful. And reading those books, it's exactly in alignment with how I am perceiving the way in which he is trying to reach out to build intimate relationship and to make himself approachable. He's trying to, not come off as scary. He's trying to build this intimacy. And one of the other things that I think, Riordan got that is just brilliant is that Apollon is the one who also has sent out avatars, and that's in the ancient Greek tradition. So, he has become human numerous times, actually. In other words, sent part of himself down to really grasp us. So I would say look at some of that, look for those trends. And then I'm also just going to say UPG, which is unverified personal gnosis. This is not a bad thing. A huge portion of what I just told you when I said, I believe that Apollon is breaking into the world. And I try to be really clear about when I'm saying something that is UPG versus when it's something that is clearly rooted in an ancient source. But if we're in real relationships, we should be getting information that is not just what is contained in old sources. But the big thing is you always want to interrogate it a little bit and make sure that it should make sense. There should be some consistency with the character and the notion that, like, Apollon is never going to be acting like Ares, like Ares. He isn't. That's not how he is. He's got a particular type of character. So, take a look for consistency. It should make sense, but don't shy away from your direct experience. Everything we know about any of the gods comes from somebody's direct experience. So when I hear people being like, haha, UPG, that's just UPG, and really dismissively, well, then what they're not doing, that's being a role-playing game. I'm not interested in playing a role-playing game. This is real to me and to many people who are like me. We're in relationship. So that's part of that little spiel here. So there are a lot of different types of relationships that you can build with the Theoi. So sometimes you might just call on them for something in their domain, and sometimes they may call on you. So I'm going to tell you a quick story here. This is from a number of years ago. Some of you may remember it when there was that really horrible tidal wave that smashed into Japan and created real problems at one of their nuclear reactors. And when that happened, it was such a travesty. There was just so much destruction and death that I went running to my altar, and I fired up my altar, and I was just saying out to the cosmos, it's like, I want to help. I want to help. If there is anything at all that I can do to help, I want to help. Just tell me if there's anything I can do. And a being appeared to me. She was absolutely beautiful. She was in kind of yellow flowing robes and just, you know, radiant and gorgeous and like radiating. And she said, "My name is Amaterasu, and if you are willing to help, then I need you to go do this." And I said, "I will go do this." And so I did. Okay, so I didn't actually know anything about Amaterasu, including her name. So I had to go look her up later. And as it turns out, she is the Shinto, I believe, solar deity, and is often considered to be like the mother of the people of Japan. So first of all, I got some verification on my unverified personal gnosis, a little bit of verification there, which always feels good. But the reason I'm telling you that is that I have never had any other contact with Amaterasu. So this was a circumstance. This is not like, oh, and now I have this deep bond because she came to me. I mean, it's not like that at all. It's like, here was this situation. It was an emergency. I was willing to do the work. She gave me the work. I went and I did it. And that's it. I mean, you know, that is all that there is there. I maybe could reach out to her if I felt that I needed to or wanted to and try to build another relationship. But that in and of itself, that was a specific kind of thing where I care about what happens in the world, and she gave me work to do, and I was grateful. So I just wanted to point that out, because sometimes there are things like that where this is in alignment with our two domains or our two areas of interest, which is I have a strong interest in trying to be of use and make this world better, and using any skills that I happen to have on any levels in order to do that. And she had a strong agenda of protecting the people of Japan. And so that is a circumstance in which we came together as collaborators in that instance. So another type of relationship that you might have is that you might be closely connected to a group or a pantheon. I'm closely connected to pretty much anything that is in the Hellenic or Hellenistic sphere. That comes out of a lot of incarnations, and that's an ongoing deep relationship with a bunch of different beings, and I'm in that pantheon. There's some that I have like particular intimacy with, but honestly, I can call pretty much any of them. You may be regular colleagues. So the situation with Amaterasu, that was a very temporary kind of situation, but you might be regular colleagues. In other words, you know, regular work, or they sponsor a group that you may work with, such as Apollo and Athena are sponsoring Theophania. The other thing is that, as I had mentioned, you may have these various forms of intimacy. And in particular, I want to emphasize a little bit about that individual intimacy, that you can be in a close personal relationship. And a lot of times that's what we're often kind of like looking for. So for individual intimacy, there are a number of different ways in which that can look. There's what we often call the tutelary relationships, and that is where one or more of the great ones becomes kind of your teacher, your guide. There can also be a little bit, what I would consider a little deeper than that, is an apprenticeship. And this is how I understand part of my relationship with Apollon. And that is that it's a tutelary relationship, and that I am learning from him, but it's got a even bigger edge on it, in that what I am trying to do is to do his work in the world, which is also my work in the world. So I'm trying to do our work in the world. So, you know, these various aspects that he has that are part of his kind of portfolio, I am trying to learn in order to actually be able to enact and embody those in this world, with the idea that I am becoming like him. My ultimate goal here, many incarnations, but the ultimate goal here is to become like Apollon. The goal is apotheosis. So those are a couple of different forms of intimacy. You can also just have friendship. You can just have friendship, which is not necessarily a tutelary relationship, but it's just a closeness. But all of these kinds of relationships can come with any number of emotional constructions. And I want to be clear about that. There's a lot of different ways in which these can present themselves. So if you're in an intensely intimate relationship with any particular theoi, it is important to note that there can be increasing requirements and limitations. So one of the things that I want to point out is that, these are not required relationships, and that there are some very powerful magicians, including some who I know and really admire as well as love, who choose not to be in these particular types of very intimate relationships because they find them limiting. And again, using myself as an example, I understand myself as being in an apprenticeship with Apollon. And part of what that means is there are various forms of work that I may have the capability of doing, but I cannot do because they get in the way of that relationship. If I'm going to deepen in a direction that includes, among the other parts of the portfolio, healing, there's various kinds of work that is more warrior oriented that I cannot do. It would cause harm to that relationship. So you can only be deeply intimate with a limited number of beings because we have a limited amount of time and energy. So I just want to point that out, because the other thing is there is no virtue in being a god collector. And, that is something where, again, I see parts of overarching pagan culture that kind of tend to drive in that direction. And I don't see the virtue in that, because much like, if you have so many friends that you don't have any like depth of those friendships, you're really missing out. So, you don't have to have just like one, it's not that necessarily. But when you're starting to go more deeply into intimate relationships, if that's what you want, and if you do, they can often come with some limitations in terms of like some things that get in the way of the increasing depth of your relationship if you take them on. But if you do decide to go that way, there is a limit just of your own time and energy. Okay. The other thing that I think is important here, because, I talked a little bit in the beginning about how I understand the great ones as wanting to help us evolve and help us really step into our own as full spiritual adults, is that you need to give them permission. You need to give them permission to help you, the ones that I respect. Because like I said, I don't think that they are acting like, kind of an infantilizing sort of way. So give the great ones with whom you are in relationship the permission to help you. Ask them to stop you if you're going to do anything that is really, truly stupid. And if you are in a very intimate relationship, like if you decide to really build a very intimate relationship with one of them, have the discussions to figure out where your boundaries are. So I'm just going to share a little bit here. Mine with Apollon. One of the things that he said to me pretty early on is that he will never give me an order to do something unless it is about my safety. And if it is about my safety and he ever gives me an order, I will know it is about my safety and I am supposed to do exactly what he says right then. And, that is part of our agreement, so that I have understanding that he's only ever going to do that in those circumstances. And that is part of our relationship that I have agreed to, because again, I understand myself as being in an apprenticeship, and that is a different kind of relationship, because it does mean he is taking some massive karmic responsibility for me. So that is part of that relationship. All of that needs to be negotiated. So let's talk a little bit about other spirits. Ancestors. So most people who are in the craft, who are pagan, we do work with ancestors, and ancestors are human spirits. So they are human, and they're just not currently in bodies. Maybe. I will talk a little bit about that maybe in a moment, but I just want to point out here, actually, I'm going to say it now. Ancestral reverence is not inherently opposed to reincarnation because we exist on all those different levels of being. And so what that means is that sometimes when you are talking to an ancestor who may have been born again, you may still be talking at a level that is like not in the embodied consciousness because there is a continuity that's there. So in my experience, I think that we can continue to relate to ancestors who may have become incarnate again, but you can continue to interact with that part of them that is more subtle and that is not dependent upon a body. So again, as a reminder of the various aspects of self, the vast majority of who and what we are in terms of our own consciousness, we are not aware of in our middle selves. So one of the reasons that you might want to work with ancestors is that they understand humans exceptionally well. They really understand humans. So my experience, because I work primarily with the Hellenic Theoi, they have really, really good human user interface, the Hellenic Theoi do. I mean, part of that, like, oh, they're so anthropomorphic. Well, that's also just called really good human user interface. So, the beings themselves in their own, when they're themselves, like not in relationship directly with us, I'm not sure how anthropocentric they are, but they know how to put on a really good human user interface. There are other pantheons that I've occasionally run into that their human user interface is a little harder to make sense out of. But ancestors always understand us really well. And one of the other things about them is that they're really, really invested in your ability to thrive. Like your ancestors, the people who lived and died and struggled and passed on their genes to you, are really invested in you thriving. So they have a very intimate personal connection. There's also knowledge in the blood itself. We are all connected to each other not very far back. If you go back, in like geologic time, it's no time. So we all have this, there's very few ancestors that we actually all come from. But one of the things that I encourage you to just experiment with is, sit quietly and try to move your mind a bit into your blood itself and ask questions, because there's a lot of knowledge that's hidden there that, in my experience, you can use various forms of your kind of intuitive abilities to find out things that the people like all the way back have given you, and that there's knowledge encoded in there. So we do actually have numerous different types of ancestors that I want to quickly bring up. There's the ancestors of your blood. These are your actual just ancestors, the ones that we think of that, are your lineage, physical lineage ancestors. And as I said, they are very invested typically in your success. Now, what do you want to do about ancestors who are problematic? Everyone has problematic ancestors. This is another thing. Everyone has ancestors who are problematic. Every single person has murderers, rapists, cheats, liars, addicts. Every person has ancestors who are problematic. And that can be kind of a challenge sometimes from the perspective of people who do ancestor reference. There are a number of different things to kind of consider there. First of all, when people die, they often get a different perspective. And sometimes those ancestors who were very problematic have some of the biggest kind of awakening that makes them very positive to deal with after they're dead. So that happens. So that's one thing that definitely can happen. But there's another thing, which is that sometimes they have problems that you may want to be doing, and this is a little bit more advanced. So this is not something we're going to cover here, but there are rites that you can do that can help heal ancestors that then often pass into the bloodlines going forward. Because a lot of times when you have ancestors who have done really, truly horrible things, helping them kind of heal, because anyone who does horrible things, that in and of itself creates a wound in the soul, that can also start to move and heal the pattern of the harm that they have caused. So that's a more advanced thing, but there's reasons to do that. But the big thing is, I mean, having an overall sense of ancestor reverence. Everyone has problematic ancestors. There's not a person on this planet who doesn't. So those are ancestors of the blood, but there's also ancestors of the heart. These are people who you knew, who are not in your blood, but are really, truly ancestors of your heart. And they also can be approached as ancestors. Then there's ancestors of the spirit. And what I'm calling there, these are often like, the people who are influences on you, people whose work influenced you. They can be people who influenced a particular area in which you work. If you are a spiritual person, they can be the ancestors of particular lineages. So for me, for instance, among others, Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, Madame Blavatsky, Annie Besant. I've got some of the theosophical ancestors. So those are ancestors of spirit, Alice Bailey. Those are all people who are important in some of the various lineages. That's Alice Bailey, originally Theosophy, and then moved over to the Arcane School. I mean, I have strong lineage ties in that. So these are also ancestors of spirit. Heroes. So heroes in the ancient Hellenic sense are those beings who are functioning as very big ancestors for people who are not their descendants. That's really what a hero is. And typically they have become a hero through great achievements or dedication or love, because it can be any of those, in ways that make them important to a larger group than those that they are originally, those of their descendants. So there's a lot of different groups in here, but the big thing there is heroes are intercessory. It doesn't mean that they're perfect. It absolutely does not mean that they were perfect. All of the ancient Greek heroes, really flawed. I mean, go read the mythologies on some of that, really flawed. But they achieved some matter of excellence that was like at the top of the human game in some area. And they are important and willing to be intercessory as basically ancestors for those that are not in their blood, and a large group. So it's not just like, a couple of friends or something. So examples of this very commonly and important for us, like I am in the United States, George Washington is a hero for us. And he's a very important hero for us because one category of hero is the Archigetes, who is the founder. Anytime you have a founder of anything that lasts, you are dealing potentially with an ancestor who is going to be intercessory on behalf of the whole. So in that case, he is not, the reason he's a hero is not actually It's not at all because he was perfect, because that is a very imperfect, or was a very imperfect human, but he can be called upon as the father of the nation. And there's a lot of power there. So anyway, those are kind of your types of ancestors. I want to go into the Fae a little bit. The Fae it's a general category, and it includes a whole host of non-human spirits. So they're non-human, from which we go from like various forms of nature spirits all the way up to the shining ones, who, depending on where you are and where you want to draw that line, sometimes the shining ones could be considered gods. They could be considered Theoi. They're not quite in our level of vibration, but many of them are quite dense. They're really kind of down in that etheric. And part of the reason that we talk about the greater earth, and I really like that framing, is that there are many, many different beings with whom we share this planet, and only some of them have physical bodies. So the Fae, they are typically, their densest level is what we would call the etheric, which, depending again on where you want to cut those lines, that is either the densest of the subtle vibrations, or the most rarefied of the dense vibrations. So they're just a little vibratory above us, and they are therefore in many ways more able to immediately affect us than a lot of the other types of spirits. They don't have to, like the Theoi, they can come down, but they don't usually hang out in that level of density. So one of the things to know about the Fae is that way back when, we used to be in close relationship. Like, we used to be able to kind of interact pretty much physically. Well, no, physically. We used to be able to interact physically with them. They could come here and did with a certain amount of regularity. And then at some point in time, there was a great rift in that relationship, a very extreme rift in that relationship. And the Fae walled us off. They walled themselves off from us. There's doors in that wall, but they basically walled themselves off. And this is UPG, but I worked with one of the Fae for a long time. And what he told me is that it was when human beings began raising animals for food. So it's not the eating of meat. It was the fact that we took over their reproduction and took over their whole lives to have them be food, that was considered very monstrous. And so there's a group of the Fae, and it really had to do with controlling their reproduction in order to use them as food. That really was the root of, like, that made us monstrous. And so there's a whole group of the Fae that believes we're monsters, and they wall themselves off in self-protection. There's another group of the Fae who believe that, as I understand it, they believe that we are kind of like children who need to be taught better. So they don't see us as irredeemable monsters, but there's some real issues there. And of course, when you look at our ecology and you look at a lot of this stuff, it's a little hard not to see us sometimes as kind of monstrous. So that's part of what this walling off is, which is a great wound in the greater earth, is the rupture of that relationship. So you'll sometimes hear with the Fae, the Seelie and the Unseelie. So, the Seelie are the good fairies, the Unseelie are the bad fairies. And I just want to say that the thing there is, it's not actually that they're good or bad, it's what they wish for us. So again, it's like the Unseelie fairies, I'm not willing to go down with like they're bad. I do, however, note very strongly that they do not wish us well. And again, they're in that group that sees us as monsters, is the way in which I understand it. And then there's the Seelie court, that, they are trying to help us and help us grow and are more well disposed towards us. So that's the Fae. And you need to be, so they're there. If you are in relationship with them, great. You need to be kind of careful because, like I said, there's a pretty big lack of trust with a lot of them. And so, being aware and careful. And then there's like the nature spirits. And like I said, some of them kind of get collapsed into the fae sometimes, but there's a bunch of different types of nature spirits. And these are spirits that I really think we need to be building very strong, healthy relationships, because we've done a lot of degradation in our relationships with nature and with the spiritual aspects of nature. So first of all, I just want to mention here, there's like, collective intelligences. So you can be in relationship with a bear, but you can also be in relationship with bear. So, a bear and bear is like a collective intelligence of bearness. There's the laurel tree. You can have an individual laurel tree. I have several. These are very sacred to Apollon. And then there's Daphne. And Daphne is the Greek for laurel. Daphne as a being is the collective intelligence of laurel, of bay. There are intelligences that have their bodies in the physical, but they're non-human. So there is an intelligence, there's the body, what we see as a mountain, that is the body of the mountain. There is an intelligence and a soul and a spirit of that mountain. Same thing with rivers, spirits of place. One of the things that I really kind of like to do, and I encourage you to do, is I live in a city. Walk and feel where the actual boundaries of different parts of the cities are. Like you can cross over, and that's kind of the territory of a spirit of place, if you can pay attention to where those are. Sometimes they align with neighborhoods, sometimes they don't. But the world is full of spirits. And to me, that's one of the greatest blessings about this path, is that you get to expand the types of relationships that you are in. And that is a beautiful thing. So I do want to talk quickly about baneful spirits, because we do just need to mention them. There are sometimes some intelligent spirits who want to cause problems, but this is really rare. It's really, really rare. So I want you to be clear about that. Generally, unless you are really pretty powerful, you're just not going to attract them. So a lot of times when people think that they are under attack by baneful spirits, almost always, they're not. But more commonly, you pick up the equivalent of a tick being out in the woods. So that's part, again, of why the purification rites are so important. Because if you get enough of those, that's bad. It has a real effect on you. Another thing that sometimes happens is that you're careless and you pissed off a nature spirit. Like don't be dumping your trash in the woods, And in fact, if you want to make friends with them, pick stuff up. But more rarely, you can piss off a fae. You can run across a fae, and one of the ones that's not well disposed towards you, or you do something that's really offensive. Sometimes you're in a relationship with a spirit that you don't know very well, and you did something that was disrespectful. And sometimes what they do is just they remove the help that they're giving you. Or another thing is that they'll tie up your luck until you make it right. I mean, that can happen. And especially I find, that can happen if you are doing something with spirits of place or something along those lines. So when in doubt, you can do some divination and figure it out. And a real, truly meant apology and asking what you can do to make something right in a reciprocal relationship to restore health of right relationship is usually good. So again, our goal here is being in right relationships. So that's reciprocity, being respectful, having some appropriate boundaries, and respecting appropriate boundaries. And basically, if you wouldn't treat an embodied individual in a particular way, never ever do it to a spirit. If you wouldn't do it to a human, don't do it to a spirit. And that's just really good kind of basic courtesy and a good kind of guiding principle. So in the praxis set of this video, we're going to discuss some skills in building and maintaining right relationships with spirits. So we will see you in a bit for the next video, and thank you.